moving on over to the wide receivers who, you look at inside the top 10, it was essentially quarterbacks, wide receivers, and tackles. So some intriguing names, and obviously for dynasty draft purposes, or even, year one, redrafts, a lot of impact players who might not be going in, the top couple of rounds here if you're redrafting, but probably those mid rounds, the Marvin Harrison Juniors of the world, Malik Nabers, like there's some really intriguing names who I think are probably going to make some day one impacts without needing to kind of get that rookie learning curve, so to speak. So, you got Marvin Harrison Jr. went at fourth overall, Malik Nabers went sixth overall, Rome Odunze went ninth overall, and then you had some others who obviously went in the first round as well too. Like, who is the top of the heap for you, and who's maybe a dark horse pick that you think landed in just the perfect spot for them to be set up for success?
Well, obviously, like Marvin Harrison, I actually have him in my top 15 for this season. I think he's going to be a top 15 draft pick. If he's there in the second round, I am snatching him up without even hesitating. He just does it all. Him and Trey McBride are going to be the dominant receivers in that offense. I think Kyler Murray has his money. He knows the team is committed to him, so he is happy and ready to go. I think he's going to have a breakout year if you can snatch up Harrison in the second round. I think when I looked at it, currently Kyler Murray's going in like the sixth, seventh round. If you want to get that combo, oh baby, you're looking at a good start to your fantasy team.
Yeah.
So I really like that matchup. Malik Nabers, fantastic player. Just don't love the fit.
You're not believing Danny Dimes is going to turn into, Drew Brees 2.0 all of a sudden?
Yeah, no, that one's a little low for me. I think eventually he'll get there, but he's just so explosive that anytime he has the ball in his hand, he can break it off and put up big points for you. But if you're doing a redraft league, like, is he really going to get 100 to 120 targets that you kind of need to be an elite wide receiver from Danny Jones? I just don't really see it in that offense.
Yeah,
Uh,
the Giants offense in general is going to be, I think, an absolute dumpster fire this year,
yeah.
especially when you factor in that Saquon, essentially their do it all, safety valve when things break down and Daniel Jones starts panicking. He can't dump it off anymore. So, I think it's going to be really tough for Neighbors to put up big points this year because of A, who he has throwing the ball to him, but then B, that wide receiver room is so thin in terms of everyone else that's in there is kind of a slot receiver. Like they've got so many of the exact same type of player that, if you just put an elite corner to just shadow him all over the field, like an Ahmed Sauce Gardner or something like that follows him around, or you just double team him, like there's no one else pass catching wise on the Giants that really scares me beyond Neighbors. So I just don't think he's going to get a ton of legitimate looks as far as being open for Daniel Jones to be able to get him the football. So again, kind of that Michael Penix Jr. situation where love the player, don't like the fit, but beyond that as well too, Malik Neighbors, again, don't know the guy, but based on his interviews, based on kind of the rumblings that were coming out of LSU, he strikes me as the type of person who might enjoy the spotlight and kind of the extracurricular activities more than some of his peers in his draft class. So is New York City, the greatest landing spot for him? I don't know. I think based on, that alone and the fact that that, hey, Odunze is still available. I, I like Neighbors in a vacuum better than him, but if I'm New York, I kind of like Rome a little bit better in terms of the fit and making sure that he stays focused on football because from everything you've read about him, it's kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. Gym rat just wants to, focus on the gridiron rather than going out to the club. He's going home and watching game film. So I don't know. Well, I could be proven wrong here, but that's just kind of my gut reaction before they've even headed to training camp on those two.
I couldn't agree more, honestly. I think Rome would have been a better fit with, like, I mean, we talked about this plenty of times about the Giants, how they have just overloaded with slot receivers. And
Mhm.
Rome is a true X. Like he would have been a difference maker immediately on that team. I still think he's going to be eventually great in Chicago. We'll see how it works out in year one, but yeah, he is an absolute workhorse. Rome, sorry, he's an absolute workhorse. He works on the outside. That interaction with Caleb Williams and Rome after the draft when he like invaded his interview, like it just shows two like absolute opposite characters. Like Caleb Williams is going to be the face of Chicago. He's going to be a great guy, and Rome is just going to like, yes, sir, I got to work.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what New York needed, more than that kind of outgoing Malik Nabers. They don't need that kind of distraction right now with what they're building on the team. They have enough issues to fill.
Yeah, and knowing that, Giants are probably going to have a long season. I think they'll probably be picking inside the top 10 at next year's draft. I don't think there's too many sports books that disagree with that notion. But is that something that more of an outspoken wide receiver who's kind of, picked up an accent there all of a sudden for some reason, but
And wide receiver diva.
yeah, that's exactly where I was going, and I started merging the words. But that diva-esque wide receiver, right? I don't think that's going to fit well in a long season, right? I think Rome probably would have been fine, just like, hey, I'm trying to get better every day. Whereas Nabers has more of a chance of having that fit at some point of why am I not getting the looks? I'm always open. Get me the ball. I should be touching the ball, 12 times a game here. Like, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But I really love the fit for Rome in Chicago, especially because he's going to be ostensibly wide receiver 3 at least to start the year. And we'll see how Keenan Allen in his checkered injury history kind of holds up over the season. But even still, that's a great position because he's not going to be needed to be the guy out of the gates. He's going to be able to learn every single route in the playbook from two very, very high level wide receivers that have been there and know how to get the job done at the professional level. So love that fit. And then, yeah, circling back to Marvin Harrison Jr., like you were saying, he's at the top of the heap for me. Dynasty picks probably should be, first overall selection in most of them, unless you're rocking a 2 QB league or something like that. But I think he's going to be the most impactful out of those kind of big three in year one. In terms of sneaky picks here, I've got two of them. So I'll let you go first, and I'll pivot to the other one because I have a sneaking suspicion like we've probably got some of the same names listed here as far as dark horse candidates.
Yeah, actually, I have way too much written down about the rest of the wide receiver class. I might post all my notes for an article later if people want to read more. But I love Ricky Pearsall. Ricky Pearsall is my guy. There is risk, of course, that he is just going to be behind Debo and Ayuk this year. But if they do trade one, Ricky Pearsall is going to step in, and he is just going to take over a lot of touches in San Fran. For those who didn't know that he got drafted in the first round by San Fran, there were rumors that Ayuk was going to get traded as soon as the Pearsall pick was made. All of a sudden, the rumors were like, oh, maybe they'll just move on from Debo because Pearsall can do a lot of what Debo does. He has insanely good hands. He is probably the best route runner in this entire class. And he is just tough as nails. Like he will just stand in there and take any hit to make the catch. And he is like Kyle Shanahan is just going to utilize this guy to the maximum. So like it is a risk, but thankfully most people who are doing redraft leagues get to wait until after training camp. And Debo can be traded after June 1st, I believe, with no contract implications. So if Debo gets traded in a few, a month now, then Ricky Pearsall is stepping into a leading role.
Yeah. And kind of begs the question as well, too, right? Like, are they drafting Pearsall to become Debo 2.0, where, you've seen Debo get heavily involved in the run games before, and some of that's been much to his chagrin. Like, he's been making it known that he wants to be more of a traditional wide receiver. So is it the sense that he's going to be the new Debo and now they can move on from him? Or do you get the sense that they're actually drafting him to take that aspect that Debo's been complaining about off his plate, and now they're going to run with a three-headed monster at wide receiver? Like, which do you see as the most likely scenario to play out?
Honestly, I feel like they have to clear up the wide receiver room and just get someone out of there who is disgruntled.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it be Ayuk or Samuel, they have to commit to one of those two guys and just give them the big money. But in my heart of hearts, I just really want them to be like, okay, Pearsall, you take that role, and we dim down what we do with George Kittle. George Kittle is obviously always banged up, works harder than anyone, but let's make Pearsall more of an aspect of this offense and kind of tone down what we do with Kittle. That would be like my ideal situation, like from a franchise perspective. But fantasy wise, I think you're hoping that someone is moved out of that locker room.
Yeah. Well, I've got two of them here, and I'm shocked that one of these guys wasn't one of your first ones off the board there. So thank you for giving me Ricky Pearsall hall pass. But Xavier Worthy going to Kansas City. I mean, anytime you can join a Patrick Mahomes led offense, that's a good landing spot for you. And obviously, they've got some interesting names, but kind of reclamation projects still on the books there, right? You've got Rashee Rice, who, we'll see how the whole offseason plays out in terms of the car crash and whether there's any kind of implications from that and whatnot. We won't speculate at this point. We'll assume he's kind of good to go. But then you've also got Hollywood Brown, who's going over there now as well, too. So you've got some names who have the potential to be the guy, but still no one who's the penciled in, number one wide receiver out there. So I think it's very much still up for grabs. Do I think he comes out of the gate, weeks 1 through 3 and is putting up monster numbers? Probably not, right? Like they're going to still be feeding the ball to Travis Kelce quite a bit. But to your point about George Kittle in San Francisco, I kind of see this as where you get to scale back some of those targets, especially, over the middle where he's going to be taking a big hit, and try to keep Kelce as healthy as possible. Because even though it's crazy to say, right? They still go out there, they win the Super Bowl. He almost puts up another 1,000-yard receiving season, but no spring chicken anymore. And you can really see weeks 1 through 8 versus the second half of the season. He was slowing down out there just because of that accumulation of hits. So you get someone out there who can absorb, probably in the first couple of weeks, 3 to 5 targets per game is probably what you're looking at. But if he does well with that, we've seen Patrick Mahomes start zeroing in on people before, once they prove they don't have cases of the dropsies, or they're able to actually run the route that Patrick wants them to instead of breaking it off on an option and going the complete opposite direction that he throws the ball. So I really like Xavier Worthy heading out to Kansas City. And I also really like Brian Thomas Jr. heading to Jacksonville, especially with some of the moves that they've made this week in terms of releasing some bodies to free up some, a pathway to get significant looks right from week 1. Do I love the player that much? I mean, I'm not as high on Brian Thomas Jr. as some other people are, but I just think that there's not a whole heck of a lot of bodies on that kind of pecking order of pass catchers down in Duval that are going to be absorbing targets over him.
Yeah, so I'll go back to Xavier Worthy. Like the reason I didn't mention him is he is 165 pounds. That is disturbing. Like people are trying to compare him to Tyreek Hill. He is not Tyreek Hill. Let's stop that comparison. Tyreek Hill is also 20 pounds heavier.
Mm-hmm.
And Tyreek Hill is tiny. Xavier Worthy, his ceiling is Deshaun Jackson, who was a great player, and Andy Reid coached him and did great things with Deshaun Jackson. But he was such an inconsistent player from a fantasy perspective that I'm not gonna put a lot of stock into Xavier Worthy for fantasy this season. You're completely right. Kelce is going to be ramped down this year, but they also brought in Marquise Brown, who is going to work on the outside and like pretend to catch the ball and just draw pass interference calls because that's all. Yes, Rashee Rice might miss some games, but he is going to work on the inside. And Xavier Worthy, I think, is going to be more of a thought like more of a something to scare defensive coordinators, and Andy Reid will try to work him the ball 2, 3 times a game, but I just don't see him being like that fantasy impactful in his first year. I was to Brian Thomas. I was really big on Brian Thomas until he landed in Jacksonville. I think I officially decided I'm out on Jacksonville and what
You're done with the Trevor Lawrence experience at this
I'm
point, eh?
I don't know. It's been 4 years now, and he hasn't done anything. He hasn't really broken out. He hasn't really been able to produce a number one wide receiver, so top 12 wide receiver. Um, and Brian Thomas just is not an established route runner. He can go deep, and they already have that in Gabe Davis. And Gabe Davis also blocks his ass off. So Gabe Davis is always going to be on the field. Kristen Kirk's always going to be inside. So I just don't know if I can really buy into Brian Thomas breaking out this year.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting points too, right? Like Xavier Worthy, the most likely kind of path I see for him this season is probably goes undrafted in quite a few leagues. Maybe people put the little, depending what league you're in, the star or the red flag or the watch player icon next to his name there. And then maybe weeks 1 through 3, at some point, you're going to see that Deshaun Jackson stat line of like 4 catches, 132 yards, and 2 touchdowns, just because he got behind the defense and ended up hauling in like a 70-yard bomb or something like that. So you'll see a feeding frenzy happen. Then you'll probably see, because of, the fact that it doesn't matter who's on the roster, Casey likes to spread the ball around. So maybe there'll be kind of that 2, 3 weeks of 2 catches, 3 catches. Everyone kind of maybe sours on him a bit, drops him, and then the next week you're going to have another big spike. So all that to say, buckle up. It's not for the faint of heart if you're going to be taking him. But that being said, I think him more so than some of the other, non-Marvin Harrison Juniors of the world, kind of late first round beyond picks, is in a situation where if he's able to be consistent with the targets he gets, because I think the targets are going to be inconsistent, how he deals with them, if he's able to show that he's got sure hands, that he's able to rack up yards after the catch, that he's able to not necessarily be a dominant blocker, but at least willing to engage to a certain degree there, I think he could be a very, very sneaky, kind of week 12 and beyond pick who could help a lot of teams that are going to the playoffs in fantasy win some weeks that they might otherwise not have. Again, if you want a steady, high floor player, not your guy. But if you want, someone that you can plug into a flex position and could potentially win you some weeks, I think he's a sneaky late round addition, and you just kind of watch what happens in those first couple of weeks.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now, and obviously, like the ADPs right now are based on best ball. So like Xavier Worthy is going to be much higher than he probably will end up settling in, but he is in between Deontay Johnson, then a Xavier Worthy, then Jackson Smith and Jigba, and Cortland Sutton.
Yeah.
So exactly what you're saying. There are some really reliable, safe receivers there. And Xavier Worthy is kind of the explosive, holy crap, he can win me a week by himself. Or he's just going to have a bad matchup and Andy Reid's going to just put him out for cardio for a day and just win underneath. So he's very kind of fluctuating of what he's going to be able to bring you each week.
Yeah. I think, again, if you're looking at matchups here, you kind of look at the teams that take away the middle of the field, right? Because that's kind of like where, Kelsey and Brown kind of enjoy living there. So if it's a team that's susceptible to the long ball, those are going to be the weeks that you want to make sure he is suited up and inserted into your lineup, because it might be Kelsey and Brown that are out there kind of doing cardio, and Mahomes is uncorking deep shot after deep shot down the field, and you get these crazy stat lines out of it. Yeah, Brian Thomas Jr., interesting prospect. Do I love, the fact that Trevor Lawrence is his QB? I think Trevor Lawrence is probably that middle of the road QB.
Yeah.
For me, fantasy wise, Trevor Lawrence is kind of that demarcation line where there's if anyone doesn't have a better skill set than him, like they are undraftable and you can just pick him up off the waiver wire, right? Like he's kind of that cutoff for where I would take him and consider in a pinch, hey, all the good QBs are taken. Like, screw it. There's not much of a difference between what's left. Maybe I'll just pick up Lawrence in one of the late rounds and just keep stacking my wide receiver group or adding running back depth or whatever. Like, that's kind of where I am with that. But I just don't see there being a whole lot of competition for targets in Jacksonville. And like you were saying, you look at the AFC South right now, this isn't a division like it was 2-3 seasons ago, where it's, hey, just run the ball because you're going to be up 30 over, the Texans and the Colts and whatnot. Like, it's a frisky division. So I think there could be a lot of shootouts in the AFC South. And if that's happening, you're going to be seeing a lot of 40 plus passing attempt games coming from Trevor Lawrence. So the volume is there. But yeah, again, do I think Brian Thomas Jr. is going to be a household name by the end of the season? I don't know, but I still like him more than some of the other landing spots out of especially the first rounders, because you go through some of the other ones there. Xavier Legette, who, before we get into him, did you see his opening press conferences?
I love it.
Oh my God, it's a C note of the water boy here.
Yeah, 100%. I was like, am I like, did I just zone out and put on the water boy? What is going on here?
Yeah, unbelievable. But I just think, Carolina has so much work to do that
So,
it's tough to get excited about anything on that roster. Like, we'll talk about running backs in a second there, but like outside of maybe Jonathan Brooks, I don't know if I'm touching anything on that roster this season with 100-foot pole. But I know you had kind of a sleeper pick, and we'll maybe talk about him right now as far as going to Cincinnati. Did you have any other wide receivers that you really liked in this draft class in terms of landing spots?
I actually did, yeah. Back to Legette, you can't bet on a player like this. Okay, this is his college career, years 1-4, 9 catches, 80 yards, 1 touchdown.
Yeah.
Over the season.
Yep.
Second season, 113, 0 touchdowns. 863, 1 touchdown. And then he exploded in year 5. I skipped year 4 because whatever. 71 catches for 1,255 yards and a touchdown.
Yeah.
What did he do for 4 years? Like nothing. Like how? Like I just cannot buy into that, and I just don't understand why the Panthers, who have so many holes in that roster, felt the need to trade up to give up another asset to get him. Love Legette. I'm going to listen to every single interview, but
David Tepper at work, ladies and gentlemen. There you go.
That is my guy. I love David Tepper. But no, my probably one of my favorite fits actually. He is who I drafted with the 10th overall pick in this dynasty draft that I'm in, is Ladd McConkey. I am a big fan of him. He can create really good separation. He has elite acceleration. And he is now Justin Herbert's wide receiver 1.
Mm-hmm.
Like there is no doubt that he is going to beat out Quentin Johnson and Justin Palmer. Ladd McConkey is a big fan. I'm going to be trying to steal him in redraft leagues at the end of every single draft. I think he is super, super high upside.
Yeah, no, he's definitely someone who could end up turning into kind of that Julian Edelman type, where it's just he's getting peppered with 12 to 15 targets a game. Do I see him stretching the field and hauling in 80-yard passes? Absolutely not. But he's going to be a PPR monster, I think, in year 1 especially. And someone who was taken right in front of him, Keon Coleman. You want to talk about good opening press
God, I love Keon.
Yeah, he's kind of like a 9-year-old that's just built into this like Greek god body almost. But I think he again is going to be someone who's going to be stepping in and seeing a healthy dose of targets. I'm not as high on him as I think a lot of people are. I like the fact that Josh Allen is going to be obviously his quarterback there, but I kind of see some other options on that team, like a Dalton Kincaid, maybe really taking that kind of next step this year, and Coleman having more of a serviceable but not spectacular rookie year, and ultimately develops into a more elite wide receiver in the future, but it just kind of has a real steep learning curve as far as if you actually watch some of the tape on him. He's I wouldn't even describe him as football fast on some of his routes. He's just bigger and stronger than the college age kids he was playing against. So he could kind of get through with going at what most wide receivers would be like 3/4 speed routes. That was what stuck out on tape a lot to me. So I'm just a little bit leery about how that kind of translates to the next level.
Yeah, you're 100% correct on that. Like he cannot create separation. He did not create separation at the college level. So to kind of assume that he's going to create separation at NFL is just it's asinine. Like that's just not going to happen. But the pairing with Josh Allen like is so great because Coleman can just make fantastic contested catches.
Mm-hmm.
His highlight reel is unbelievable. He makes these ridiculous catches. So with Josh Allen, there is definitely a path where he just barely has separation. Josh Allen hangs onto the ball enough, creates enough space that he just slings it and Coleman goes up and gets the catch. But what's his name, Shakir and Kincaid and now Curtis Samuel, they all excel working on the inside, which is where I think Coleman will eventually will excel in his year one. Eventually he can work his way outside and become an outside receiver, but I don't think that's going to happen in year one. So it just seems a little bit muddled, kind of like what we talked about with the Giants, where there's just too many interior receivers that I have a hard time seeing Coleman being fantasy relevant in year one.
Yeah. Did you want to quickly touch on Jermaine Burton before we move on to
Yeah,
tight
no,
ends and running backs?
absolutely. Really big fan of Jermaine Burton. Tyler Boyd is gone from Cincinnati. Who knows what's going on with T. Higgins? Although, like, we have to point out that the Bengals have a history of letting guys play on the franchise tag.
Mm-hmm.
They did that with Jesse Bates most recently, who is my favorite safety in the league. So they just let them play on the franchise tag and then let them walk the year after. So they could be having that discussion with Burton. So right now it's Jamar Chase, T. Higgins if he sticks around. Burton has an opportunity to really carve out a role. Andre Yisobosh is kind of going to be the other guy. So if Burton can carve out a role, or if T. Higgins moves on, like you're going to bet on Joe Burrow coming back to full strength and being the Joe Burrow that we all know. So Burton is definitely a name that you should be keeping an eye on.